Welcome to the Cameron's Conversations podcast. So, in today's episode, I want to talk about the difference between getting into good shape and getting into great shape and what that actually looks like in real life. Because, in a lot of ways, it's often simpler than people think. And there's kind of two things that I think really matter in that kind of gap, if you like. And the first one is it's actually really, really simple, is time. A lot of the time when you see, and I think a lot of people see this with client results I post, when you see someone get into really, really good shape, especially if it's driven by a weight loss phase, if that was the kind of main goal and they've been focusing on dropping a good bit of weight and they've maybe started in a position where they weren't feeling super comfortable at all and they've gotten to a position where they are looking bloody brilliant, often as not, the only difference between them going from not comfortable at all to comfortable but clothes kind of fitting better, feeling better in that sense, but certainly not super lean yet by any means, not seeing tons of definition, then getting to that stage where a good bit of definition comes through, and then going to that stage where there's tons of definition coming through, a lot kind of leaner, that kind of typical shape that we would expect when we look online and we kind of see people and we think, oh wow, they are in great shape. The only difference is time, right? And I saw this myself when I kind of did a big weight loss journey and I dropped 20 kilos and got into kind of like photo shoot shape. And that first 5 kilos I lost made a massive difference. Like, there's no beating around the bush. The first 5 kilos I lost, I felt better in all my clothing and I thought that kind of like jawline came back a little bit. I just kind of looked a good bit leaner, even in photos. There was a big difference, right? It was definitely noticeable. But with my top off, I didn't look lean by any means. I still had a ways to go. And I dropped another 5 kilos and I started to get into that stage where a good bit of definition was starting to show through. I've obviously trained for a long time, and even when my nutrition at that phase many years ago wasn't brilliant, I'd still been training for a while. So it didn't take me a terribly long time to feel like there was a bit of definition in areas like my shoulders and my upper back starting to pop through, the areas that naturally I'm leaner in anyway. And then I dropped another 5 kilos, and that's probably where it really started to bite, where I started to look like there's a lot of definition, right? You could see the kind of all the kind of muscle mass that I'd built from years and years of training come through a lot more clearly. And then the last 5 kilos, there was this tremendous change where I suddenly looked really, really lean. I had abs all of a sudden and all the rest of it. Now, the only difference, I guess, through that journey was time, right? Is often as not, it is continuing to lose more weight. And one of the things that I think is really interesting about this is for a lot of people, they underestimate how much they have to lose in the first place. And this is really normal. It's by no means a criticism. I did this too. I think that people often will say to me like, oh, I feel like I've got 5 kilos to lose. We'll lose 5 kilos and they will feel tangibly better, but then we'll often go on to lose 10, 15, sometimes even more. And I think they're quite surprised by how much they have to lose. Now, that's not to say that to get into that position where you feel comfortable, you need to be that lean, right? You don't need to go all the way to that end point. The great thing is you feel better week by week. But something that kind of like the reason for this podcast, it was a conversation I was having where someone kind of looked at a client result and they're like, crikey, like that guy's in great shape. It was just a client that I showed a progress photo of, and they were talking about it and they're like, oh, what would I need to do to get there? And they're already on their journey with weight loss. And I honestly just said to them, I was like, you just need to keep going. I was like, you get to that point too, but to get that level of definition, to look like that, yes, training is a factor, and I'm going to come to that in a second, but often as not, people do have more weight to lose than they think, right? That's often the kind of key factor. When someone says to me, it's like, oh, I can't see any sort of definition in my midsection yet. Do you think I need to do more ab work? The answer often is not as no, not really. I mean, look, doing some ab work sensible and pragmatic for sure, but doing more of it just to see your abs more actually is never really particularly helpful. A lot of the time, what's going to make the difference is just losing more weight. And that's something I very much find. So the way my kind of genetics are as well, and I post obviously my progress photos in this kind of weight loss phase, so this will become more evident as the next few weeks go on. It's like I am very much someone who my arms, my face, my shoulders, my neck, my upper back will all look quite lean. Even my legs will look relatively lean, and I will still hold quite a lot of weight around my midsection hips. and it will take me to the point that I am very, very, very lean before I see my abs. It's just the way my genetics are. One of my really good mates, who's also a PT as well, and we've trained for a similar amount of time, probably have not vastly different kind of body compositions, relatively speaking, has abs pretty much all the time. In fact, can sit at my kind of start weight of a weight loss phase and has abs, right? I might not be particularly lean otherwise, but there's a genetic component to that too. So obviously, and I see this with clients as well. I have some clients that, they come to me and they want to lose 10 kilos and still have a little bit of definition just because of genetics. I definitely don't have those genes, sadly. But the point is this, is that a lot of the time when you are trying to get to that kind of shape, you just need to keep doing what you're doing. You don't need to make vast changes. You just need to keep plugging on for another 4, 6, 8, 12 weeks, whatever it is, because actually a lot of the time we do have more weight to lose. So I do think that's probably one of the first pieces that comes into this, is that if you are kind of at that point where you're like, do you know what? All my clothes fit much better. When I put on a top, I kind of like the way it fits, which is great. And my jeans are much looser and I've maybe gone down a size or even 2 at this point. So you feel comfortable, right? To put on your clothes, you feel comfortable, but you're not necessarily seeing as much definition as you would like. It's not that the training isn't working, and I will touch on that in a second. It is very much the case that you've probably just got more to lose yet. Now, there is another part to this, of course, and that is about the training side of it, is that for a lot of people getting into great shape, it helps having more muscle mass by quite a margin, because it means you don't have to be ridiculously lean. The first photo shoot I ever did, I got really, really quite light for me. I mean, my body weight was down to about 67, I think the lowest weigh-in was in the 66s. Only had one weigh-in in the 66s. Now, for me, as a 5'11" guy, that is pretty low, right? I was very, very lean. I was kind of perma-cold, as I called it, like permanently chilly all the time. I mean, it was November, but I really was cold. I would be in bed and like I'd have pajamas on and like 3 blankets on the bed and I'd still be kind of cold. Like, it was that level, because it was a shoot. To be clear, this is not like, this is that stage where I maybe went 4, 6, 8 weeks longer than I would have necessarily for like being in like holiday shape, for example. Like, I was a good few kilos lighter than that. But the point is this, is that I think that having more muscle mass definitely helps. It really does. And I think for most people, that's something that we want to play the long game with, where what we really want to do in an ideal world is to do a weight loss phase, lose all the weight you need to lose, and then you want to kind of prioritize that muscle gain phase, because you absolutely can gain muscle in a weight loss phase. Now, I'm going to caveat that, because it is the case that the more advanced you are, the less true that is. So for someone who's been training hard for 10 years, they are not going to gain muscle mass in a deficit, right? It's very unlikely. But for someone who's only maybe trained in a structured fashion for a year, 2 years, they absolutely can. As we get farther and farther into it, it's different. Also, the thing that is often said around this research is really, really simple, is that it's not just about how long you've been training, it's about how good your training's been for that time. So when I kind of obviously get a client in who's been going to the sort of gym, let's say twice a week for a few years, but they've been kind of like scuttering around a little bit, like they've got stronger for sure, they've gotten fitter, they maybe look a little different, but it's not that significant. You probably still have room to sort of see an increase in muscle mass whilst dieting for sure. If you've been training properly hard with a clear structure, a clear frame for progression and getting stronger each week, and you're pushing every single week, you probably are getting closer to that point where you might not be able to gain muscle in a kind of weight loss phase. So the point is once you have done your weight loss phase, in an ideal world, we want to spend some time getting as strong as possible and building a little bit more muscle, because what that will allow you to do is to be in better shape year round, for one, but it will also mean that you can kind of get into that great shape that sometimes people want to be in, because I absolutely have, and I have a good few clients who I would say this is probably applicable, where we've dieted them down to a point where they've been super, super lean. Now, they've been very happy with the progress that they've made. They feel fantastic compared to their start point, but they've maybe said to me, like, I feel really, really like I've lost loads of weight, I look far better, much happier, but I would have quite liked to have a little bit more shape, or I'd like to have a little bit more muscle mass, or I'd like to have a bit more definition. And in essence, we've got kind of like an under muscle problem. Like we probably don't have enough muscle mass to kind of sit at the look that they want to achieve. And that's obviously just part of the journey. So we then say, great, let's then focus on a muscle gain phase, which means you get to eat more calories, you get to push your training, you have more energy, because it's exactly like a maintenance phase. And you can, by the way, gain muscle in a maintenance phase. If you can gain it in a deficit, you definitely can at maintenance. Then if we allow for a small surplus, that becomes even more amplified. We have more capacity to gain more muscle mass over time. So in an ideal world, you put on a few kilos of muscle, and that then means when you diet back down, you get much leaner, much quicker. So you often have to do a really long dieting phase, a muscle gain phase, and then like a small mini diet, if you like, as well, which is kind of in essence what I'm doing, although I've pushed quite a long muscle gain phase. So mine's a little bit longer in terms of a weight loss phase now. But I noticed this myself, like, the last time I was kind of into the mid-80s, I just didn't like the way I looked particularly. I just felt like the look I had was really, really, really soft, and it wasn't the way I kind of wanted to look in general. Obviously, things are relative, and the thing I always try and stress with this is we all have our own standards and expectations. And obviously as a coach, right, the part of it that is biased, because like my job, to an extent, people expect me to look a certain way, and I have a certain expectation of myself. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't have put tons of pressure or lose sleep over that, but my point is that actually for me, what I've found now is kind of like sitting at a similar weight at the tail end of that muscle gain phase I've just done. Like in my clothing, I still looked absolutely fine. Like I could definitely see in photos, because I could see that my jawline had all but disappeared, and I definitely didn't necessarily like the way I looked as much. But in clothing and stuff, I looked fine. Like I just looked fairly normal. I wasn't finding a lot of my clothing particularly tight or anything like that. That's because I have more muscle. And now that I've dropped 6 kilos, I already see that I look much leaner because I have more muscle mass than I used to. So this is kind of the thought process you want to use, is that if you are trying to get into not just good shape where you feel comfortable, but that really, really good shape where you're kind of like being that bit ambitious of, I actually want to feel phenomenal, not just comfortable, but phenomenal. A lot of the time, all you need to do is just keep going. You need to keep dieting, losing more weight until we kind of either get to a point, and this is, as I said, like the example where we're just lean enough and actually we just need to add some muscle, or we can get to a point where we're like, yeah, actually we're really happy with this look, and then we kind of move to maintenance. But I think it's really, really important to understand that a lot of the time it is just going farther. And I see this a lot with, I think it can vary with everyone, but I do see in a lot of like male clients, it's quite common to think that they have less to lose than they do. And I don't know if that's maybe like a bias of like their height and things like that as well. I think that's a factor, but often as not, I'll get a kind of male client will say to me like, oh, I'm worried about getting too small and skinny, right? That's more common. I'm not saying that I've not had female clients say the same, to be clear, but I think this is good context, is that they'll often say to me like, oh, I feel like I've only got 5 kilos, 10 kilos to lose. I don't want to get too skinny. And it's like, actually, you could probably lose quite a lot more than that. And all that happens is you look a little bit more muscular because more definition comes through. This is the kind of Hollywood effect, is that when you see actors in films, you often think, oh, they've got loads of muscle mass. And I think you would be quite surprised at often how lean a lot of them are. And if they were to see them in a t-shirt, they don't necessarily look particularly big and muscular. They actually look really quite lean. And I have a few friends who've worked with kind of like, you know, it's sort of on that kind of like world, if you like, of people that are kind of like actors, etc., etc. And often as not, in these scenes, they look absolutely jacked. They look like they've got loads of muscle mass, and of course they are training and they are in really good shape, but they're also probably a lot leaner than you think they are. I can think of a distinct example with one of my friends, who I won't name, but one of my friends who's a coach, and he was standing beside an actor, and again, I obviously it's my friend, so I know their kind of size, etc., and this actor looks really quite small beside them, but on screen they don't, and that's simply because they've got loads of definition. They're really, really lean, but actually in terms of size they are probably a lot lighter than you might expect. So this is an interesting one as well to kind of think about. But anyway, that was a little bit of a kind of slightly winding kind of talk through some thoughts around getting in great shape. And often as not, the journey from, you know, being uncomfortable to comfortable to, yeah, I'm feeling pretty good, I'm feeling good in my clothing, to feeling like, holy shit, like I'm in unbelievable shape, is often just time. It's just pushing that weight loss that bit further. Now, I do want to caveat that there is a limit for some people where actually we just need to build some more muscle. And if you're really new to training, you've done no resistance training for years and not been active, you're more likely to fall in that category where actually building a few kilos of muscle is probably going to make a tremendous difference to the way that you look as well. So something to think about. But yeah, so if you enjoyed today's podcast, please feel free to leave a wee review.